And here we are at Veilguard, simultaneously the most interesting to talk about and the most anxiety-inducing to talk about as well. Dragon Age has never had a good relationship with timing. 2 and Inquisition both came out amidst a barrage of angry gamer boy hate campaigns and found themselves strung up as effigies for them. And Veilguard came out at the height of the reactionary YouTube rage bait economy, so from the moment Outrage merchants got a hold of the character creator and deliberately set out to make the ugliest Kunari possible, all fucking hell was going to break loose. These same Outrage merchants tried to do the same thing to Baldur's Gate 3, but because that game gave everyone the horn, they got drowned out by the Twihards. Before we get into the game proper, I do want to address that whole thing about the character creator. Basically, some people are really angry about the fact that you supposedly can't make beautiful female characters, and then turn around and make the ugliest Kunari possible as if to prove that point. Now, not to get old nostalgic old lady on you, but I remember a time when the ability to create unholy nightmare creatures ripped right from the imagination of David Lynch was a part of RPGs we all found fun.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
Of course, the notion that gamers who aren't actually allowed within the same postcode as a woman are going to be gross and weird about everything isn't new. I remember when BioWare had a vote on the canonical appearance of Commander Shepard and the Gamer Boys voted for the one that most resembled a Barbie doll. Or when Skullgirls edited a bunch of victory animations to downplay panty shots and the Gamer Boys threw a fucking tantrum for a month over it. The Gooners have always been like this, throwing tantrums anytime female characters get to look like people instead of anime jailbait. It's not even that you can't make beautiful female characters in this game. Hell, I suck at character creators and I made an unusually gorgeous Rook in less than 60 seconds. It's possible to make a woman whose sole purpose isn't to be ogled. It's possible for people who want to play characters other than supermodels to play the game and feel good about it. And that's what bothers them so much. Not that you can't make pretty characters, but that you can not. Anyway, with that debate thoroughly set on fire, we move to the game proper. To say this game had a troubled production would be putting it lightly. It technically started development in 2015, intended to be a smaller story set in the Deventer Imperium, but problems with Andromeda and Anthem led to staff being shifted to other projects. At one point, it had been cancelled altogether because EA wanted a live service game, and the original idea had no room for it. Then it was restarted again, this time planned as a live service game, but then Anthem, already a live service, came out and failed horribly, while Jedi Fallen Order did extremely well. So the plans to make it a live service were scrapped entirely, and EA pointed to Jedi Fallen Order and said, make it like that. To which I presume BioWare then said, are you just gonna make us reshuffle it again once your ADHD medicine wears off? So Dragon Age is now an action game. The same kind of action game as Kingdom Hearts, Dark Souls, and Jedi Fallen Order. The dodge and counter style game where the focus is on avoiding and reading enemy attack patterns. This is honestly my jam completely. Previous Dragon Age games I always felt were a slog to get through, always feeling like someone was trying to emulate the original Baldur's Gate, but not only did they lack the clear delineation of round-based combat, the party size was just too small for that kind of strategic thinking. I don't know why BioWare and Larian Studios both decided on 4 instead of 6 for a party, but I wish someone would hit them over the back of the head with a 2nd edition D&D rulebook. So after 10 years of turbulent development and constantly changing direction as BioWare dealt with a parent company who was slowly getting addicted to ketamine, Veilguard finally released right into a pit of vicious, bloodthirsty gibbons to be an effigy for the culture war Outrage merchants, branded simultaneously as too political and cowardly apolitical at the same time. Where you stand on this depends on where you stand on the franchise as a whole. If you're someone who thinks Origins was this super dark and mature adult story that covered serious subjects and did it really well, then you'll probably hate Veilguard. On the other hand, if you've actually played Origins at all, Veilguard will be rather refreshing because it's actually philosophically deep, whereas Origins is like you took Lord of the Rings and smothered it in rape and self-conscious irony. Veilguard follows on from the end of the Trespasser DLC when Solus makes his plans to tear down the veil that he'd initially created to keep the elven gods at bay. Solus is in fact Fen-Harel, the elven god of lies and trickery. With the Inquisition disbanded, Varric assembles a team consisting of Harding, an Inquisition scout from the previous game, Nev Gallus, a Tevinter mage who has information on where Solus is performing his ritual, and Rook, a loose cannon from one of Thedas' independent organizations, whose special talent is being able to do this. They end up stopping Solus's ritual, but in the process free the last 2 remaining elven gods, Elgernarn and Gillinane, who immediately set out trying to burn down the world to rebuild it in their image and be gods all over again, starting the worst and last blight Thedas will ever see. In the process of that, Varric is killed and Rook is named the leader of the Veilguard with the intent to stop the elven gods and Solus once and for all. How do they do that? They gather as many experts on the Fade, elven history, killing Darkspawn, assassinating big things and slaying bigger things they can, and hope they bring their friends to the final battle with them. Look, it's not the best plan, but Rook's last job was as a lackey for the Underground Railroad. This is a little outside of her depth. She's doing her fucking best, okay? The thing is, the idea of elven gods coming back to take over the world is just a little too far-fetched for some people, so Rook has to do the difficult grunt work of making alliances and currying favors to get people to listen to her. She doesn't have Josephine doing it all for her like Llewellyn did.
Can't say I didn't try.
This means going around to all the independent nations in northern Thedas and helping out the people there. Not just your individual companions, but the organizations they come from, helping them become strong and entrenched enough to be able to stand against two literal gods, their archdemons, and them specifically. Oh, and they can only be killed with this really special one-of-a-kind dagger, so I sure hope none of you has unfinished business that might make you miss. It's not looking good. After the previous games where I shat on Origins and Inquisition for glossing over Thedas' socio-political issues in favor of the big bad evil guy like a D&D campaign run by the most unoriginal dungeon master on the planet, you'd probably think I hate Veilguard even more for going even bigger with its stakes. Not true, actually. Veilguard is a lot better at trying to blend the socio-political issues of the big bad evil god destroys everything story. The conflict is so big and so massive that everyone needs to be at their best. Any unfinished business that might distract from the mission, or people being less than completely loyal to Rook, means that shit's going to go sideways really fucking fast. This is rather shamelessly copied from Mass Effect 2 and 3, where the majority of the story is taking your crew on little therapy missions so they can be at their best when they fly into the galactic core, along with having to keep up the strength of the different factions that are coming to your aid against the gods. I don't mind, honestly. If you're going to copy anything, copy Mass Effect 2. Narratively, it was the most satisfying. So this time, you can't actually leave well enough alone. You have to go through Thedas, ripping up the old establishment and laying something new in its place, or you simply won't succeed. People need to have a world they can actually fight for. In particular are the Veil Jumpers. After the discovery of how to make the Illuvian work in the previous game, and what's actually beyond them, the Dalish clans came together and formed an organization to delve into the ruins of Arlathan and recover their history, ancient elven technology, and their culture. The Veil Jumpers are the most relevant to the main plot, as the revelation that the elven gods were tyrants who used the elven people as keenly as the Tevinter did is something of a shock for the Dalish in general. I heard rumblings from the fandom that this made the ancient elves evil, which I always thought that was a weird conclusion to draw. In the Dragon Age 2 video, I had commenters pointing to the Tevinter Imperium as proof of the harm mages can do, because the Tevinter Imperium is a brutal authoritarian dictatorship led by mages. But I have one question. How is that different from the brutal authoritarian dictatorships in Ferelden, or Orlais, or Kirkwall?
Their actions are mere symptoms. Your society is the disease.
There's a bias among a lot of white people called the minority monolith. Essentially, when a person from a minoritized group does something bad, it reflects badly on everyone in that group, while when a privileged person does something bad, they're a lone wolf. In real life, Muslims get constantly harassed over the actions of extremist groups thousands of miles away, but few white people ever get harassed for the actions of white extremist groups like rednecks, Klansmen, the Catholic Church, the United States federal government, the IDF, Republicans, Tories, MAGA. I could keep going, but we'd be here all day. If a cis white man assaults a child, that's a crime. If an LGBT person does it, it's supposed proof of our complete and total degeneracy. Actually, we don't even have to do it, people just have to think we do. Dragon Age discourse goes the same way. People blame mages and elves for the actions of the Tevinter and the Evanurus, but nobody's trying to chain up all the humans for the actions of Loghain. In fact, there's an entire quest in Origins that is specifically about this and how you shouldn't judge an entire people based on the actions of a few. That usually comes immediately after going through one of the Origins where that is done without criticism, but they're human, so it's different apparently. This double standard actually forms the plot line for the Veil Jumpers. Bellara, your Veil Jumper companion, actually feels guilt over how tyrannical the elven gods were, in spite of the fact that the elves were the Evanurus' first victims. Bellara is actually a city elf who later joined a Dalish clan, so she and her family have been directly subjected to human racism. Combined with losing her brother, this has given Bellara an extreme guilt complex, so she ends up apologizing to others unnecessarily for the actions of the Evanurus. Getting Bellara over this, and by extension helping the Veil Jumpers accept that their gods being tyrants means nothing for them as a people, forms the backbone of both Bellara's quest and most of the quest for the Veil Jumpers themselves. It comes together to form what is probably some of the most beautiful and heartfelt storytelling the series has ever had to offer. A moment of very soft and vulnerable sentiment right in the middle of probably the darkest entry in the Dragon Age series, pulling back the eldritch bloodborne horror for a moment to appreciate a people looking forward to a bright future, a future they now want to defend from the Evanurus. The elves are a people without a culture, their culture damaged by the Evanurus and then destroyed by the Tevinter, a people desperately trying to figure out who they were and where they're going, displaced from their heritage completely and utterly. This is the first game where you can help the elves do something other than just merely survive. You can help them live by giving them back their history, and help them make a path forward for themselves. If that doesn't give you enough reason to want to stop Elgarnon, nothing will. Bellara's quest in particular ties this in with her grief over the loss of her little brother, which she, of course, blames herself for, only for her brother to return alive and in service to a blighted demon. Though Bellara manages to get through to him so they can stop her, it's not soon enough to keep him alive, and she loses him a second time. Everything between Bellara and Syrian had me crying my fucking eyes out. From the grief and regret for his disappearance, to the relief at finding out he's alive, to the dread at realizing the kind of person he's become, and then the melancholy of his inevitable fate. On its own, it would be beautiful, but that it ties into the tribulations of the elves as a whole makes the sorrow that much more intense. This is probably the first game where the elves actually get to look forward towards something, to aspire to something, not just to reclaim the past, but to build a real future for themselves. I was honestly surprised. This is a Dragon Age game? game? Veilguard even manages to do an idea as fraught with problems as Sera will. Davrin is a Dalish elf who didn't fit in with the culture of clan life. He wanted something different, to hunt big monsters and do something important, so he left his clan and joined the Grey Wardens. Davrin is displaced from the Dalish by his own design, but at the same time doesn't disparage the Dalish to make up for it. He chose to leave. It was for his happiness, and he doesn't resent his clan over it. In fact, his quest revolves around doing this a second time, as he actually survives killing Archdemon Razikale, and now doesn't know what to do. Wardens are supposed to die fighting Darkspawn, and he just didn't. What's his purpose now? Through his quest, you can help him save Griffins from extinction by rescuing the last few from a blighted former Grey Warden, and by the end, I ultimately chose to leave them with the Dalish to become protectors of nature. This ties in with Davrin wondering what to do now that there's no darkness to fight. Taash is in a similar boat. They were born in the Qun, but raised in Rivain by a mother who still lives by the Qun, but simply didn't want her child raised to be a berserker. The Qun is actually fleshed out to be not strictly totalitarian, but also not. It's still a very directed and structured society, staunchly collective to the extreme, but people can join and leave as they wish. In the second game, we learn the Qun take in anyone who wishes to live by the Qun, meaning a lot of elves join the Qun hoping to escape human racism. In fact, the Arashok is so disgusted by the way humans run their society on such fervent inequality that injustice is the reason he attacks Kirkwall in the first place.
Look at you. Like fat doth Russie, you feed and complain only when your meal is interrupted. You do not look up. You do not see that the grass is bare. All you leave in your wake is misery. You are blind. I will make you see.
The Arashok probably gives people the belief that the Qun is brutal and violent, but that isn't the case. The Arashok is there looking for an artifact, but he's a warrior. In the Qun, people don't move beyond their station. So the reason he's often undiplomatic is because he's not a diplomat. It's not what he was trained or raised to do. The Qun is interesting specifically because it stands in direct contrast to the very human idea of individuality to the extreme. It's at the opposite end of the spectrum, in fact. But to people who have nothing, to people who are at the bottom of an otherwise free society, that kind of stability can be attractive. In Dragon Age 2, when you free Katogen and kill the Qunari who try to kill him, he just kills himself because he wants to live by the Qun. I'd say that sounds dystopian, but you know, I currently live in a society where libertarian ideas are causing a global climate disaster, so touche, Arashok. But Taash, being born with the ability to breathe fire, meant they would have been made into a berserker, and their mother didn't want that for them, and so she left the Qun for Rivain to work with the Lords of Fortune. Taash, as a result, has been wedged between the Qunari and Rivaini culture, trying to find out who they are. Everything about Taash's identity is in turmoil. Their culture, their desires, even their gender, all of them are in a state of flux, so their story is about determining these things. Most of it is in relation to their mother, who keeps trying to relate all of Taash's experience back to the Qun in some way, clearly wanting Taash to embrace their Qunari heritage. And in a moment of delightfully dark irony, Taash's mother understands them better than they realize, as Taash has been completely failing to understand that their mother has been looking for the answers they seek since Taash was born. The moment that sticks out to me in particular is when Taash comes out as non-binary to their mother, who has absolutely no idea what that word means. She tries to relate it back to a term in the Qunari language that refers to trans people in general, but Taash lashes out at having language dictated to them. I've heard people claim that Taash's story shouldn't use the word non-binary as it's not fantasy enough, putting aside the fact that this is a very weak argument to make, as the series' linguistics have always been somewhere between Carlin and Cartman.
Rat shit, bat shit, dirty old twat, 69 assholes tied in a knot, hooray, lizard shit, fuck!
And nobody ever complained then. We can say fuck, but saying gay is off the menu despite those words being the same age. It's always just the worst kind of people trying really hard to rules lawyer LGBT people out of existence. But on top of that, the story would have actually been worse if they'd done that. If they had come up with a new term like, I don't know, wedged in the fade, there we go, this scene would have had its context completely changed. Instead, this moment...
So, I'm non-binary. What does that mean?
changes from a mother of one culture completely failing to grapple with the language and terminology of her child from another culture, into a rote exposition dump where Shathan is serving as an audience surrogate to receive said lore dump. The effect the scene is going for doesn't work if the player themselves doesn't have the context necessary to not end up sitting on Shathan's side of the table. It's telling that this is the only time the word non-binary is used in a franchise that typically eschews traditional LGBT language. The term isn't even used when Taash comes out to everyone else. Actually, Lily, some trans people have agreed that they should have used a more fantastical term. Pixie, I am not unfamiliar with the concept that some of my fellow trans people are really fucking stupid. I like how Taash is often jumping the gun with people. You can really get the feeling that this is someone who's had everything about them questioned and interrogated and is at their limit. It makes Taash come off as irrational, but not to the level of extreme self-hatred that made Sera so unlikable. Plus, you have many opportunities to say, Taash, take the Alluvian to a tundra and chill. However, despite all of that, the ending of Taash's quest involves ultimately having to choose between embracing the Qun or embracing Ravani culture. For a story like this, the ending choice is unusually binary. I've heard some people suggest that this is because the writer, Trick Weeks, is whiter than a ghost experiencing severe blood loss, but I honestly think it's entirely because of the hero of the Veilguard mechanic. The entire point is that characters get a choice between two sets of armor and two abilities, and that choice is fundamental to their story. Bellara's choice is about preserving elven history. Davrin's is about choosing a future for the Griffins, and by extension himself. Emeric's is about achieving his dream to divide death or clinging to personal attachments and disrespecting it. Taash's story is about being torn between cultures, but the ending choice has to fall into a binary for the sake of game mechanics. So I don't think a change of writer would have achieved much because they still have to fit into that mold to begin with. As the player is going around recruiting allies for the fight against the elven gods, we get to see places in Thedas that had only been talked about before. The Tevinter Imperium is probably the big one, as it's the closest thing the series has ever had to a real big bad, a magocracy that is racist against elves to the extreme and still practices elven slavery. This aspect of Tevinter is actually not seen much, as you spend most of the quest in Tevinter and Docktown, a section of Minrathis where the poor and downtrodden live. Given that slavery is the business of the rich and powerful, you aren't going to be seeing many of them here. They're either serving in noble houses or they're out in rural areas working the fields. Instead, you see the perspective of the residents of Docktown as they're set upon by the Venatori, Tevinter's top super secret police. Oh wait, I mean totally independent extremist cult that is not endorsed by the government, winky winky. This forms the majority of Nev's questline, where the Shadow Dragons and the Threads are dealing with the schemes of the Venatori, who have allied themselves with the Elven Gods in the hopes of reconquering all of Thedas. Antiva works much the same way. The Antivan Crows are a brutal crime syndicate who take on assassination jobs and kidnap children to groom into assassins, but since they're really good at killing big things, you just have to kind of grit your teeth and pretend you don't see that. One thing I've heard from people talking about this game is that the world of Dragon Age has been sanitized, that the game is more kiddie and soft as opposed to Dragon Age Origins' dark themes and storytelling, how it's been reconfigured to be for teenagers. I have a serious problem with criticisms like this, not least of which being that complaints about media sanitization is ridiculously overblown in the eyes of the terminally online weirdos. They often don't elaborate on what those dark themes actually are, they simply say it as if the meaning is obvious, and without the elaboration I get the suspicion what they're actually complaining about is something else. See, Dragon Age is not dark and never has been. Origins is just really good at looking like it's a dark, serious, mature story because everything is brown, characters are racist to the point of cartoonish exaggeration, and your companions react to what are otherwise sincere story beats and characters with self-conscious irreverence like they're aware they're in a fantasy game. But Dragon Age is a series where the apocalypse happens time and time and time again and you will always prevail, where intense systemic bigotry and self-destructive hierarchies are simultaneously immovable and utterly irrelevant when it comes to the impact they have on the world, where no amount of inaction or apathy by those in power can stop the plucky underdogs. Not even when a usurper actively sabotages everything and has the specialized, highly trained army of Darkspawn killers slaughtered down to 2 recruits who were conscripted that day. Through sheer grit and gumption and the power of friendship, they will still defeat the Archdemon and save the world. That's not dark storytelling, that's the Owl House. I've asked people before to explain to me what makes Origins dark, and they always come back with the fact that it has rape in it. Including rape in a story is something a lot of developers straight up won't do, so those that do are instantly lauded as having a dark story because they went to places the Puritans won't go. But developers often don't cross this line for a reason. It's a fucking sensitive subject, and it shouldn't be in a story just so teenagers and people with the brains of teenagers can feel like they're mature and grown up for liking it. And it's funny how even when they bring that up, it's always the objectification of women. The Arl's son waltzing into an aliage and comically over the top saying, "Grab a whore and let's go, isn't it a party?" Or the Broodmother being the single most over-the-top ridiculous concept that Bioware's ever thought of. You know what nobody brings up? The Dark Ritual. Morrigan suggests convincing Alistair to have sex with her in order to conceive a child that will absorb the old god's soul from the Archdemon, saving you or him from having to give your life to kill it. Alistair doesn't want to, and the player has to convince him to do it. This is such obvious sexual coercion. Have sex or die isn't a real choice, and consenting to it isn't consent at all. But because Alistair is a man, this doesn't get brought up. Alistair himself acts with his usual self-conscious irreverence about the whole thing. I deliberately omitted it from the origin segment to see if anyone would bring it up, but they didn't. This is the single most uncomfortable moment in the series, and yet it's laughed off. It gets its own pervy sex scene with Alistair keeping the DreamWorks eyebrow burned onto his face, which tells you what the game thinks of sexual assault. It's either the backstory to a monster, the backstory to a monster, a silly little joke to laugh about, or the fake-out start to a thrilling action sequence.
You're gonna regret this.
Sorry, did I say thrilling? Outside of that, the only thing dark about Origins is the color palette. And honestly, I think that's what people point to. Origins released at the height of gaming's brown era because a lot of teenagers convinced themselves that muted colors is more mature. And again, like teenagers, the presence of racism, sexual abuse, and people just generally being shit is what registered as dark. This is what dark themes means to a lot of people. It doesn't matter that the series never challenges those ideas, or at the very least kills the people responsible. It's just that it's there. It's all aesthetics. Veilguard knows what primary colors are, and everyone's too busy fighting the Blight to call Rook Knife Ear every 5 seconds. Therefore it's sanitized. This would be like if you called Dragon Age 2 puritanical because they won't let you fuck Bethany. I don't know, I've always found media that is superficially dark and simultaneously too chicken shit to unpack the ideas their stories present to be a far greater example of media being sanitized. Media made for a group of people specifically to be as unchallenging as possible, to revel in human misery and callousness for your entertainment, and ask nothing more challenging of the viewer than which color of blood do you want to see when you sodomize your brother? Origins doesn't do anything with its racism than show you people being racist, and if you play as an elf, you get subjected to racism, and if you play as a human, you get to be racist. And the gamer bros are extremely fucking racist. So a game that revels in that racism is exactly their jam. If Origins had unpacked that racism, done something about it more significant than getting to kill a few cops, the gamer bros would have blown a fucking gasket over the game being woke. Oh, sorry, it was 2009, I meant to say PC bullshit. Dragon Age 2 is a lot darker than Origins because the majority of the game is about one woman's struggle to protect what she holds dear and losing again and again and again. More and more people she loves being ripped away from her, and even the ones that survive are forever beyond her reach. And that's because no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you fight, the game was rigged from the start. The system's too entrenched and too powerful for you to do anything other than simply delay the inevitable. At least not without huge amounts of support. Society will simply step over your corpse and continue on as it did. Even when you manage to do good, it often comes at a cost. Someone is going to get hurt. Starting a rebellion against the Chantry will see many mages die in the process. In the end, Marion flees her new home, her family reduced down to just one of her siblings, if even that. In the end, the game tells you that no revolution comes without pain. Maybe you can create lasting change, but there will still be many who won't live to see it. Origins never had any teeth to it other than, hey, look how horrible that person is. You want to be that person? It's a very specific kind of media. The kind of media that douses itself in blood and gore and bigotry and all other kinds of human nastiness, but never to a degree that the audience has to feel guilty about giddily indulging in it, or dare risk hitting too close to home. Always comically over the top, always dripping in insincere irony, and never asking anything more vulnerable of the player than to take a load off and take a refuge in the audacity. It's, well...
You backpedaling fuck of a brother! You chose me! You did! You did!
Yeah, that's the style of writing Origins is working with. And in the same vein, it would have been a lot darker had it actually explored and deconstructed its own premise. If the racism that coats Dragon Age had been used for anything other than, lol, Tolkien was a pussy, let's rape some more elves, it would have been a lot darker and a lot more adult, but Origins isn't adult. It's the most childish interpretation of adult you could possibly get. It is what 17-year-olds in 2009 thought mature looked like. And guess what?
Times change.
Origins went from, aesthetically at least, flipping the script for the fantasy genre to setting the tone for it. We're in a post-Dragon Age, post-Game of Thrones, post-Snyder Cut world.
Why did you say that name?
The dour and grim and brown and bleak that's all edge and no point is the norm. It's tiresome, people are getting so fucking sick of it. Even Star Trek is doing this song and dance. Conversely, Veilguard is more brightly colored, its characters generally nicer and more earnest and sincere, but in terms of emotional weight, it's the heaviest game in the series. There's a theme of new beginnings over the entire game that encompasses every character arc. Characters in some way having to find new reasons to live and keep going forward, finding a new purpose in life, moving beyond grief and loss, accepting you're going to live no matter how much you were prepared to die, literally defining who you are, and stepping into new and unknown and quite frankly frightening territory. For the Elven people specifically, involves killing the gods that oppressed their ancient people and completely freeing them from their grasp forever. There's an entire quest at the end of Bellara's story that's just walking with her through some ruins, lighting torches in an ancient elven funeral service for her little brother, who she adored and cherished and has had to bury twice now. And at each one you have a melancholy conversation about history and elven culture, relating the elven people's need to move forward and build a new society for themselves without only clinging to past ruins, to her having clung so tightly to the lingering memory of her brother. How a refusal to properly deal with grief can stagnate a culture just as certainly as it can stagnate a person.
Yeah, it's just hard sometimes. Harder than it should be. I don't know what our people's future looks like. But now they know their past, and they have a future. I hope you've found peace wherever you are now. Dareth, Shural, and Na Belanaris. Siri, I love you.
I've always had a rule in place for my critique, and it's my most important, superseding everything else. If a story makes me cry, it doesn't matter what issues it might have. Any awkward dialogue or janky scenes or moments where the writers had eyes bigger than their belly, none of that matters. If it was moving enough to actually make me cry, it's done its job in spite of all of that. It's just fucking good. Bellara's story had me choked up multiple times, and its ending is a beautiful capstone to a two-pronged story about growth. It's a story that ends on a note that is unusually hopeful for a Dragon Age game. It offers the possibility of a better future for the elves, and with how much wisdom is packed into it, it makes Origins look like an early access visual novel by comparison. I already made that joke. Sorrow, pain, death, regret, and loss is omnipresent in this game. You spend so much of your time crawling over the kind of cosmic horror ripped right out of Bloodborne, seemingly indestructible and unending. Half the villains are people who have gone mad from their own regrets and pain, and the rest are the ones who have caused that pain in the first place. The ocean of darkspawn that the games always tell you about, now reflected in some of the most brutal combat encounters the series has ever had. Regret and pride having doomed entire cultures and might doom everyone if you can't stop the deranged egomaniac who is convinced that only he can set things right, no matter how many lives are lost along the way. His sheer disregard for the lives of others, sacrificed like a goat on an altar to his own pride. The bright and colorful beauty of the ancient elven empire contrasted against the oppressive tyranny and ritual sacrifice the Evanurus inflicted on its people. But amidst all of that is a general attitude of hope. Thedas is under attack by a sentient blight that's being controlled by gods. Gods themselves are attacking and coming to destroy everything. People die, cities get razed, even the Grey Wardens are reduced to a fraction of their former selves. But they bleed so we can kill them. Veilguard is at times oppressively dark. You lose repeatedly, companions die, at least one is unavoidable in a similar vein to Mass Effect 1. People slowly lose the things they're living for and have to find new reasons to keep going all over again, having to pull the drive to fight and bleed when they're at their most hopeless, and it seems like it would be easier to just wait for the end. And they don't have the armies of multiple nations at their backs, or the sheer demented fanaticism of the Chantry. These are just people whose only reasons to keep going are for themselves and the people they love. It's a game where if you don't take your time to solve these problems, you will lose. You will lose everything. You might stop Solus, but there won't be much of a world worth saving in the process. It's the only Dragon Age game to blend these world-ending stakes with the political nightmare Thedas has become, and do it almost perfectly. If it had the gall, the nerve, to end with the bad guys winning if you didn't prepare enough, it might have just been perfect. To claim that the bleakest game in the series, but one which expertly employs that bleak tone to create something beautiful, is sanitized compared to a game whose only claim to maturity is sarcasm, rape jokes, and getting called knife ear every 10 seconds, is not only dumb, it's straight up dishonest. I've been told by a lot of people that my pushback against this style of storytelling means that I just don't like dark media that challenges me. And honestly, you don't know what that means. I was watching dark and uncomfortable films and playing dark and uncomfortable games while you were sucking your thumb. The loudest champions of dark themes on social media deliberately seek out media that has as many superficial trappings of maturity as possible, but which is as unchallenging as humanly possible. Media that is caked in racism, but not in a way that asks you to think about it. Media that revels in abuse and morbidity, but which deliberately avoids asking uncomfortable questions. Media that will soak itself in sexual abuse, but not ask you any questions about the way in which that abuse is enabled. You don't know what dark means, and you never have. The discussion of whether or not Veilguard is dark, anyway, is an irrelevant one. Tone is not an indicator of quality. Quality is. A dark game that's bad is still bad regardless, and making a bad game dark isn't going to save it. But understanding what makes a story good or bad is difficult, and can't be easily quantified, while equating nastiness with quality is easy, so dumb people really like it as a metric. Is Veilguard dark? Who cares? It's good. It's not just good, it's fucking great. I'm Lily, thanks for watching.
You think yourself capable of judging me? I have faced things you could not possibly comprehend. You are a mortal! A mortal! And I am... I am a fool who finally met his match.
I'm going home, rolling low with my shot.